Hi everyone, welcome to Coffee with Jay. This is a series of questions from you, our members and viewers who have questions for someone, Jay, who actually worked and experienced Joseph Pilates' original studio. So I think I'd like to start off by establishing, Jay, how you came to Pilates and how you became a teacher working for Joe. I don't think everybody knows about that.
Well, I was a dancer. I was already dancing professionally when I got to New York. And one of the very first ballet classes I had in New York, at the end of the class, the teacher came to me and said, "You need to study with Joe Pilates," whoever that was. And I just assumed it was another ballet teacher. And I said, "Where does he teach?" She said, "Oh, he has a studio over on 8th Avenue. It's in the phone book." So I looked in the phone book and there was Pilates studio. And it was right in the neighborhood where everything was that I did. So I thought, okay, I walk past it every day, I'll stop it and get a schedule of classes. And this building was so old and decrepit and falling apart, it was really kind of scary just to walk in. And I opened the door to the studio and I don't know what kind of shock I was in. I was so startled when I saw all this stuff because who'd ever, I thought I was going into a ballet studio and there was all these medieval torture contraptions. And if I hadn't been frozen in terror, I probably would have run, but before I had a chance to, this hand grabbed me and it was Clara, "Can I help you?" And I thought, okay, I was told this is what I need, and I was kind of intrigued, so I made an appointment for a lesson, and that was that.
Wow.
Because I was aware, the very first lesson I was aware that Joe is a genius and that this work is what I needed and that it was going to make me a better dancer. And all of that was true. It did make me a better, totally changed my body so fast. It was amazing.
How old were you at the time when you arrived there? Oh, maybe I shouldn't ask that.
6.
You were a kid.
Something like that.
Okay, so when you got your appointment and you came back, it was with Joe?
Yes.
Okay, so you walked in and here's this.
And in those days, all we could wear was a little bitty, like Speedo bikini and socks. You had to wear socks.
Did you show up knowing that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were told. But you wanted to wear socks in there. This was the same place he opened in 1926. And it had hardwood floors and there were rugs under some of the equipment. But from 1926 to the 60s, decades of sweat and who knows what, in those floors. And it was right on 8th Avenue on the second floor in the front of the building. And the people who know New York, 8th Avenue is very, 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 very busy commercial street. And there's all these delivery trucks and cabs and everything going by. So all of that was blowing right up into the studio. And of course there was no air conditioning or anything. The windows would be wide open and there was a coming in. So you wanted to wear socks. But the first lesson, one thing I do remember that was, I laugh, it was fun. Because of course, I was dancing professionally and, I was all ego. And Joe was working with me and Clara came over and she stood watching for a minute. And she looked at me and she said, "Dancer?" And I said, "Yes, I am. Take one look." She looked at me and she patted my thigh and she said, "Bad dancer." And she started to walk away and she turned back and smiled and said, "Don't worry, we fix." But she was absolutely right, because in those days my alignment was so off. I was doing everything with force and I had these thighs like this and I had a behind like that. If you've ever seen pictures or any of the old film of the Bolshoi Ballet from the 1950s, that's exactly how I was built.
Big legs.
Huge.
Yeah. The Bolshoi Company class was known for just building up the lower body.
But my alignment was so off, I was doing everything wrong and I was just bullying my way through everything.
Wow. So your body changed right away.
It started changing immediately.
How many times a week did you go for lessons there in the beginning?
I had no idea.
Okay.
I really don't remember. I mean, Joe always pushed for 3 times a week, so it's probably what I did.
Yeah.
But I think I was there a lot more than that sometimes. And then, of course, because I was a dancer and I was performing, and I, would tour, I'd be gone for a while, and I'd come back, and so it was.
Yeah. Okay, so then some time goes by, and you're doing this, and it's working, and you're seeing this incredible benefit. What made you become an instructor? Was that something you asked for, or how did that happen?
No, Joe, I was never asked if I wanted to teach or anything, and I didn't realize what Joe had done to me until years later, after he had died and we had moved the studio. And Romana started doing it with people. And when I saw what Romana was doing, I thought, that's exactly what Joe had done to me. But Romana would approach people if she thought someone had potential to be a teacher. She would ask them if they wanted, to learn. But what Joe did with me, I'd go in for a lesson and he'd maybe work with me for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever, on the reformer. So fine, if you had to take a shower, that was part of your session, was that you took a shower at the end. So I'd finish with Joe and I would start heading for the shower, and he'd say, hey, do mat. And he'd be going about his business, and I'd be there and I'd do the whole mat, and I'd start to head for the shower. Hey, do chair. So I'd do the whole chair, and he would keep me there as long as he could. He'd just have me do this, do that. And he'd be watching. I mean, nothing happened in that place that he wasn't aware of. But I realize now what he was doing was making sure that I really knew and understood all the mechanics of all the exercises, which really is just kind of a given. But also being in the studio all that time, with him there teaching, with Clara there teaching, with John Winters teaching, you learn without realizing you're learning, kind of by osmosis. And when some little old lady would come in, seeing how Joe would deal with her as opposed to some strong young athlete or one of his boxers, and just being in there, you would start to learn. And then it was not all one-on-one the way it is now, not at all. You came in whenever you wanted to, you did your thing, but there were always teachers there. It was very hands-on. You always got a push or a pull or an assist with a lot of the exercises. So I'd be there and I'd be doing my mat, and somebody would be ready for a push over there, and Joe would say, hey, push. So I'd go over and I'd push and I'd go back to my mat. And if he didn't like the way I pushed, he would not say a word. But my next lesson, he'd spend an hour pushing me. Sort of like, now do you get the idea? He would never say it, but you knew that's what he was thinking, this is how you push, without ever saying it. So, and nothing was said about teaching.
Right.
Go help with the Cadillac. So I go and help some little old lady set something up for her next exercise. Then all of a sudden one morning I get a phone call, we're a little short-handed Tuesday morning, can you come in and teach for a few hours? And I'm like, what the hell am I going to teach? I don't know anything. But again, the way you worked there as a teacher, you were somewhere between a traffic cop and a symphony conductor and whatever, because it was making sure that people kept moving. And I might come over here and give this one a push. In the meantime, somebody's over in the reformer saying, how many springs do I use for this? And you should know that by now too. And then I'd finish pushing this one, and somebody over there is due for something or needs help, so I'm over there. And then in the meantime, you've come back over to this one.
Yeah. So
you're everybody is kind of working together. And as I say, the primary thing was to keep people moving. Sometimes the studio would get very, very crowded because people didn't have,
That's actually a
appointments.
question that members have written in and asked, is how did the studio run? Which I'm aware from knowing you and Romana that it was run in a very different manner than the way appointments are made with most Pilates instructors now. So talk about that too. And
well, from your very first lesson, you were trained to be independent. Your first lesson, you were doing your springs, you were putting the box on and off the reformer and all of that. And what Joe would do, the minute you walked in the door, he knew your whole life story and knew everything that was going on in your body. But your first lesson, he would sit on the Cadillac and talk to you and let you babble on and on and on. And something, you may have listened, you may not, I don't know, because he already knew the whole thing. Then he would throw you on the reformer, go, 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 throw you on the mat, go, 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 go. And then in the meantime, He knows all the issues of your body. So after you had done some reformer and done some mat, you're sweating like a pig, this is your first lesson, then he would take you over to the Cadillac and he would say, this is for you. And he would teach you something there, which would be an exercise that would go directly to whatever your issues may be. Or he would take you over to the chair and say, this is for you. So then you came back for your second lesson. He didn't even say hello, let alone how are you. You just on the reformer and go, 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 on the mat, go, go, go. And then we come and do this is for you and go take your shower, get out. So you did exactly the same thing for the first 6 or 8 or 10 lessons.
Okay.
And then you came in and Joe said start and left you alone.
And you better remember.
And he had this board that was on a little dolly that had pictures of all the reformer exercises, and he would wheel that over in front of you. So you had kind of a cheat sheet. So you'd be there and you'd be doing, okay, what comes next? And you'd look, oh, I don't do that, I don't do that, oh, I never saw that. Oh, I do this, okay. So you'd go down the list. So then once you got to the point where you're still doing exactly the same thing you did that first lesson, once you got to the point where it was starting to sink in up here and you were starting to get some flow, you still haven't had a single correction. But by doing the work, you start feeling things in your body. So then you get to that point where it was obvious you were beginning to understand, and you'd come in and he'd say start, and then he'd say, when you get to this point, stop and call me. And of course he was watching you like a hawk anyway, but you'd get to that point, you'd stop, and he'd come and teach you a new exercise and say, now, each time you do this here, now continue. He'd walk away from you again. So he would build your program by, adding 1 or 2, maybe 3 exercises he pointed out in the picture somewhere, and build you up that way. And it may be 3 months before you get a correction, and your first correction was use your gut. But again, this is Joe's genius. Everything is built into the work if you just do it.
Yeah.
And he didn't talk and explain a lot. He liked to demonstrate. Clara didn't demonstrate. She hardly talked at all. She poked.
Yeah.
This. And it immediately sends a message to your brain, and you know what she wanted you to use. So it was more about self-discovery.
Yeah.
It wasn't about, I'm so smart, I'm going to teach you everything I know. It was like they led you to discover things in your own body, which was so brilliant and so wonderful. And that's one of the biggest things that's lost right now. Because everybody wants to tell everybody everything. They want to give them an anatomy lesson. I never heard a single anatomy term, ever, come out of Joe's mouth or Clara. That was my anatomy.
And from the very, very first lesson did you get your push?
Oh yeah.
Everything was a
Oh
push?
yeah.
Yeah. Because for me, having worked with you and Romana and all these other teachers for so long, I feel that is one of the main ways that I've learned both what my body needs and what the exercise is about. It's just that tactile feeling of someone giving you a push to where, oh, I can go here. That feels good.
Yeah, people don't realize what they're capable of. And they have to, you have to get out of your comfort zone if your body's going to change, if any improvement is going to happen. If you just stay doing what's comfy, that's where you're going to stay.
It's true. And often the pushes are really nice and they feel wonderful. And then sometimes you're like, wow, I'm at the edge. I'm actually going beyond what I thought I'm capable of.
Well, some of the things like with the neck pull on the mat.
Yes.
Where you go forward, he'd push, but then when you came up, the knees are in your back, he's in there and lifting you up out of your hips and opening your chest.
Oh, I feel that right now.
You can't do that on your own.
It's true.
You cannot. I mean, yes, you can do the neck pull on your own and you can get a lot out of it, but that extra that he put in there.
Yeah.
And those are the things, a lot of that is lost, which is unfortunate, because those are things that are very important. Very important.
That was actually reminds me of a question from a member who asked specifically, he had seen in photos and he thought also in video of Joe that the neck pull, it appears in some of the photos that the legs are together. And he thought in video that the legs were together. I've looked at this myself because someone asked me the same question, and it does appear, because the photos from the side, that the legs are together. but I've always had it taught to me from you and every other first generation teacher with the legs apart. Can you address that? Did you ever see it done with the legs together?
No. But this is one of the dangers of looking at a lot of those old home movies and a lot of the old photographs and whatever. I mean, this is a method that Joe evolved over his lifetime. I mean, really 80 years he spent evolving and developing this method. And there was a lot of trial and error. He didn't have that much to fall back on, or there wasn't that much history of exercising that he could study. He did what he could. And he was after something different anyway. So maybe at one point he did it with the legs together.
Sure.
I don't know. I never did. I've never seen it done that way. But most of those home movies that people are seeing were done in the late 1920s, 1930s, into the 40s, and there's some even into the 1950s. But that was all during the course of the evolution of all of this. So as I said, there was a lot of trial and error, and he had the right to change his mind. My God, how many drugs have been approved by the FDA after all of their research and studying and trials, and it goes on the market, and a year later people are dropping dead and they're recalling the drug. We all learn the hard way sometimes. But he did experiment, and he changed his mind, and he had no problem. As stubborn as he could be and bullheaded, he had no problem.
Right.
As long as it wasn't you telling him he was wrong.
It's true.
So he could tell himself he was wrong.
So to answer that question really specifically, when you learned it and throughout the rest of the time that you were there, it was taught with the legs apart. And was there a reason for that you could?
A lot of it has to do with the lower back, because the closer your legs are together, the more the back has to open up. This is why I see people doing the spine stretch forward, and they're way out here.
Oh, yeah.
And Joe hated that. The dancers would always do that. The dancers would get in there like this and put their chest on the floor. Well, that's not stretching your spine. All that's doing is rotating in your hips.
Right.
Joe was very adamant with the spine stretch that the heels be in the corners of the mat, not on the side boxes, in the corners of the mat, because that was the optimal for what he wanted to get in terms of stretching the back. The closer your legs are together, the more the back has to stretch. The wider they are, the less stretch you're getting in the back, and the more you're getting rotation in the hips. This is why if you do the open leg rock, fine. And then if you bring your legs together, it is so much more difficult because your back has to open up so much more. When they're here, you've got a balance between the hips and the back, and it's very doable. I won't say it's easy, but it's possible. When it gets here together,
everything has to stretch.
Yeah, and it has to work. So with the neck pull, getting back to that, on the mat, we always had our feet under the strap for the neck pull. So we were always told, open as wide as you can under the strap, which generally was not quite hip width for most people.
Right.
But it gave you a fighting chance, so that when you went forward, you were getting a good stretch here, without anything being pulled out of shape or whatever. And another one of the things that's totally lost with the neck pull, it was about the rolling back. When you're rolling back, when you get about to your shoulder blades in the back, you should start resisting with your hands and pressing with your head.
I see.
So that you get that stretch all through here, the last part of it, before you're down flat.
That's why it's called neck pull?
That's why it's the neck pull. Well, you get a certain amount of stretch when you're going forward, but if you just do that and then roll back, it's no different than a roll up.
Yeah.
But where the difference comes in, that's when you got your hands back here. Resist with your hands and press with your head, and you'll feel everything opening up all the way down.
All right. Well, that answers that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to a couple of our more historical questions. A question I had was that you've talked a bit about John Winters as one of the influential people in your training, and I just would love to hear about what he was like, and that any other person in the studio that was influential for you.
John was Joe's right-hand man. I don't know when he started, but he was absolutely brilliant teacher. He was a tiny little guy. He was probably maybe 5'4" or 5'5", and he was a professional organist by trade. because nobody earned a living teaching Pilates. And he actually had a fairly good name as an organist. How he got to Pilates, I have no idea, and I have no idea how long he had been there when I got there. But boy, he sure knew what he was doing. He was very quiet, almost shy man, and he would sit there watching you and kind of rocking back and forth like this, and you'd be doing an exercise, and he'd just watch, and then he'd go, that was good. He said, would you try, and he would give you a correction this big, and you'd try it and probably kill yourself. I mean, because he had such an eye, and he could look at your body, and he knew exactly what wasn't, what was, what, and just that little thing would just shift everything or go right to where you needed it somehow. He was just absolutely brilliant that way. And I used to catch him sometimes, and I can still see this, and it was quite extraordinary. And I think one of the reasons he was able to do that, I'd come into the studio sometime to be quiet, and there would be John on one of the apparatus doing an exercise. But he would take like 20 minutes to do one repetition, because you'd see him, like, for instance, if you were doing the long stretch on the reformer, you'd see this perfect little body. And then all of a sudden, almost imperceptibly, something would shift a little bit. And he'd be thinking, and he would be absorbing all of that. And then you'd see some other thing just shift so slightly. So he would experiment in his body with these little things that ended up being corrections for you. But I'm sure this is what made him such a brilliant, brilliant teacher, because he was aware that the slightest little thing could change everything. And I kind of think, because I was a musician too, I kind of think some of that comes from the fact that he was a musician.
Yeah.
Because for a musician, the difference between an 8th note and a 16th note is just, but it's all the difference in the world in terms of the sound and what you're expressing through the music. And I think John was kind of taking, that's the way his mind worked, and I think he was taking that into his body and into his teaching. But he was just absolutely extraordinary, and he had very, very, very even disposition, and we actually became quite good friends. He was just very gentle, very kind, and he was probably about 15 years older than Romana. He died in 1984. But he was just brilliant, and I learned so much from him after Joe died.
So he stayed with Romana and taught.
Yeah, it really was, after Joe died, it really was Romana and John that kept Pilates alive, because Clara was, let's see, how old was she when Joe died? She had to be 84, 85. So she was getting up there.
1984, 85,
and her arthritis, she had really, really severe arthritis.
Wait, I'm sorry, back up. When Joe died...
He died in 67.
67.
And she died in 77.
Oh, Clara, thank you.
But so when he died, she was something like 84, 85. And she had this very severe arthritis. Her eyesight was really very, very bad. And she'd always relied on Joe for so much. So, at that stage of her life, she wasn't able to take over the studio and run everything and do everything. So, Romana took over the studio, and Clara was still teaching, but not a full schedule, and she'd come in kind of when she felt like it and when she wanted to. And it was Romana and John who really kept it alive. And there were times when the patient was very ill. Because when Joe died, of course, a lot of people kind of fell by the wayside, and then it was about 3 years later when we moved the studio to 56th Street.
Right.
And then people dropped away then, and it had to be completely rebuilt. So.
And that was Romana.
That was Romana and John who did that.
Right.
Romana, oh God, I've never seen anybody work the way she worked. Because she was still teaching ballet too. She had to earn a living. And And she was teaching ballet as well, and she'd be there to open that studio at 7 o'clock in the morning, and she would teach until 5, and then she'd walk down the street a couple of blocks and teach ballet for several hours, and then she would go back to lock up the Pilates studio. Then she would walk home and climb 5 flights of stairs.
Feed her kids.
And feed her kids and her mother, and start it all over again the next day. So she worked incredibly, incredibly hard. And in those days, I mean, her lunch, she might have a little cup of soup or half a sandwich sitting there. She had a little cubby hole that was her office, and there'd be her little cup of soup, and there Romana would be with the checkbook and all the bills, writing checks by hand to pay the electricity and to pay the towel service and to pay the rent and the payroll. She's got her little calculator there figuring out payroll and writing paychecks by hand with her half a cup of soup.
A lot of studio owners can probably relate.
Yeah, I mean, but this was her life for, you know, people who've known Romana, you know, when she was in her 70s and she was traveling and doing all these, they say, oh, she works so hard. And Romana and I used to laugh because I said, I knew you when you really, yeah, I knew you when you worked hard.
That's great.
So, not that she wasn't working hard then, but, yeah, so John was very, very important to the studio during that period. I mean, important to Romana, and because I was in and out, and you know, because I was first and foremost a dancer.
Yeah.
And so if I was touring or out of town somewhere, whatever, you know, whenever I was there, I would always be in the studio when I was in New York. But John was there.
And do you remember anyone else? People talk about Hanna. There was a Hanna, the mysterious
Hanna. What a character. As I understand it, the Pilates hired Hanna originally as a cook and chauffeur and to do errands, because both Joe and Clara were in the studio all day long.
And is it true that their apartment was in the same building?
Yeah, it was on the same floor. The studio was in the front and the apartment was in the back on
Okay.
the same floor, on the second floor of this building. But they hired Hanna to do the cooking and the shopping and to drive them when they went up to the country and, you know, do errands and whatever. So of course she saw this and she thought this was fun and she was intrigued by it and she wanted to learn and she wanted to teach. Well, she had her own way of doing everything. And Joe would pull his hair out. She was allowed to teach only if Joe was not in the studio, because Joe would. I mean, she did some of the weirdest, craziest things, but she was a wonderful person. She had a crazy sense of humor. She was just kind of wacko. You know, you couldn't not like Hanna.
Right.
She just was not a great Pilates teacher, unfortunately. But you know, I guess she was a good cook, and you know, she did the other things well. And I have no idea what happened to her, none whatsoever, because I know when we moved the studio from 8th Avenue to 56th Street in 1970, Hanna did not come with us. I don't know if that was her choice or if Romana and or Clara didn't want her, or I have no idea what happened to her. She just wasn't there.
Okay.
And I never saw her again, and I don't know. I kind of vaguely remember somebody saying she had left New York, which is possible. Because one of the things, because they were living right there in that building, which was so frightening, it's since been completely renovated and redone, and it doesn't look anything at all like it did.
Like everything in New York, but
yeah. But the first concern when Joe died, you know, some of these clients who had been there for years and years, and they were, you know, some very powerful, wealthy people, and they didn't want the work to be lost, but more importantly, they were concerned about Clara's welfare, because again, you know, she was this older woman who was not in the best of health. So the first thing they did was form a corporation that would protect the business and take care of it. Then they started looking for a place to move Clara to, a new apartment for her that would be easy to maintain and whatever, that would be big enough without being too big. And again, because her eyesight was so bad and her poor hands, I mean, were just so crippled with arthritis. So they wanted to make sure she was in a good, safe place. So they found a lovely small apartment for her and got her moved. Then we focused on moving the studio.
I see, yeah.
So that was that was what was going on between 1967 when Joe died and 1970 when we moved
Got it.
into the new studio.
And the new studio, is that the one on where Drago's was? It was a different spot.
No, it was on 56th Street, just off of Fifth Avenue. Actually, Prada is in that space now. It was on. It was 29.
So ahead of their time.
It was 29 West 56th Street on the 6th floor.
Nice.
I'm not. Maybe Prada's not there anymore, but they were. They moved in when